What is it about sport? Where does the love come from?
It gave me a hit of happiness each time I was out on a field, a feeling that I never really got from any other setting. Made me feel free.
What are some of the barriers that women and girls are still facing in community sport today?
You have to prove people wrong in many ways. Show them that you can play, that you are worthy of field space. You are worthy of, being allowed in a change room. A lot of the things we see in sport are just accepted and swept under the carpet and normalised. But if some of these things that we see in sport actually happened in professional working environments, they would not get away with it. There was a part of me that really died inside of me when that incident happened. I was like, why did this happen to me? Does it happen to anybody else? I didn't go back on the field as the same person.
Well, we'll kick it off. You don't even know the name of the podcast, do you?
No.
Have a smile
yeah.
at the camera.
Dr Aish Ravi, welcome to the In Depth and In Focus podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you, yeah. We'll cut straight to the chase. You're a bit of a boss in everything that you're doing. In fact, you've been described as a pioneer for women's leadership and gender equality in sport, which is huge, but not surprising because you're the founder of the Women's Coaching Association and the co-founder of Lead Between the Lines. You're a lecturer at Monash, and you've recently got your PhD as well. You've completed your PhD, so congrats on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, a big part of that PhD was research into female coaches and the lived experiences of female coaches. So that's super interesting, and we're really keen to hear about that later. But you are a coach yourself. You're a soccer coach or football.
Yeah.
What do you call it, football or soccer?
Oh, I'll have to call it football.
Football, yeah.
But in Melbourne, you can sometimes get confused as to what the real football is.
That's right. Everyone's
It's quite a controversial topic, right?
Yes,
You've got to get it right.
Exactly. But you've also played plenty of sports as well throughout your life.
So you're a bit of a unicorn in this space, in other words. And there's obviously a lot of passion around what you do, and we want to get a little bit more into that. But with regards to understanding where the passion comes from in your background, what's the earliest piece of context that you can give us so that we can understand who Dr. Aish Ravi is and what she stands for?
Yeah, so I think from a very young age, I've always loved movement and sport, whether it was watching sport or, kicking a ball around or throwing a ball around. It was something that it was my favorite activity. Was physical movement, and growing up in schools, in the school system, HPE, health and physical education, was my favorite subject, by a mile. And that's often because it was a subject where I felt like I could just, be free, move, and, fortunately I was pretty good at some of those activities and games that we played. Growing up, really, the only avenue that I had to do that was within school as well. Culturally, my background's Indian. My parents are very supportive of our, my sister and I's endeavours academically. Fortunately for me, sport was part of that. But yeah, it was only later on in my life that I really participated in sport outside of that context.
So what is it though about sport that gives you this desire the love? Where does the love come from?
For me, I love connecting with people, love working with people. So sport is that. It gives you an opportunity to work with people to achieve a common goal. And often, that is winning. So, I really enjoyed participating and very competitive, growing up, and probably still a bit now to this day. But yeah, just really enjoyed that you could just be move and be free, and you could work towards getting better, but also it gave me a hit of happiness each time I was out on a field playing, a feeling that I never really got from any other setting, especially sitting in a classroom or learning maths or English. So that's why I just really love sport. It made me feel free.
It's funny you say that you never had that same feeling from learning maths and English, and then you obviously went on to do a PhD and a lot more learning, which is very, very, very impressive. What is it about your background or your upbringing, or what maybe your parents gave you, that helped to be that encouragement to get you to do what you're doing today?
Yeah, so I'm very fortunate that my parents valued education. At the time, it was kind of like, why do they care so much? And it was annoying at times. But yeah, very fortunate that they valued it and they made sure that they invested in our education growing up, but also ensured that we cared about it. So I think the fact that that's really what's carried me to this day is I've always had that genuine love for learning and wanting to know more, and that comes from their support. So yeah, I wouldn't definitely not have done a PhD if it weren't for a lot of their initial investment in that education.
And it sounds like they gave you that, they sort of nurtured your passions and because you had this passion from a young age. Because
Yeah.
I like from background, I know this is me being South African and you being Indian. There are some, in certain regard, there's similarities in the sense of your parents can be quite, um, how can I say, it's quite strict on the topics of what you need to study and what direction they might want you to go in.
For them, it was always the maths and English that they really prioritised. PE was a bit of a joke. It was like, okay, do it, but make sure you get A's in everything. So for me, I loved, sport, and I was very thankful that it was part of the school curriculum, because without it, I probably wouldn't have had the opportunity to do any form of physical education or learn all the, skills that were required to play some of these games and sports. But I have a twin sister, so that also stemmed a bit of a competitiveness between us. She's actually a lot smarter than I am, or was at the time. I'd like to say we're kind of at equal footing now, but yeah, that definitely had a bit of a spark in us growing up. We just wanted to always, outmark each other when it came to the grades.
It's funny you say not as smart as her. We're our own worst critic. So, but you remember you got a PhD,
I
so
know,
that's
yeah.
pretty good. That's pretty smart.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in the last 10 years, we are seeing a lot more women and girls come through the ranks, and they're playing sports that were once traditionally seen as more masculine, like footy, soccer, cricket, and it's great to see that. And if the Matildas were anything to go by last year, they really sort of changed the landscape a lot for Australian sport and women in sport. What was it like for you to see the Matildas get up and experience that? Because I know there was just a bit of a different feeling about that. And I'm not a massive sports guy, but even I was getting into it, and it just, the whole country was able to celebrate them.
I mean, it's one of the world's largest sporting events, globally. So to have, that on our world, on our home, shores was pretty incredible. And to have a lot of people coming to, from overseas, wanting to come and celebrate women's football was pretty special. And yeah, just the atmosphere, the environment that we had at pretty much all of the games was pretty special. It was very inclusive, very friendly, family friendly. Again, it was all people wanting to celebrate, our elite athletes. The Matildas, play on the world stage. So it was great to see, the Matildas, do well, but also see some of the world's best footballers playing in our backyard. Yeah, that inspires a lot of young people to want to pick up a football and play, be involved, and we're seeing that now with the increase in interest in wanting to play the sport.
Yeah, definitely. And they, like you said, they've been role models for the younger generations to come through and wanting to play those sports as well. It is clear that the support is there at an elite level, but from a community level, what are some of the barriers that women and girls are still facing in community sport today?
Yeah, so I'd say attitudes and perceptions are pretty big. Right now, women and girls, you really are on the back foot from entering a sport environment. So you have to prove people that, wrong in many ways. Show them that you can play, that you are worthy of, field space. You are worthy of, being allowed in a change room. So just fighting some of those stereotypes, those attitudes and perceptions is a challenge. And I think the more you experience forms of discrimination or inequity, that impacts your level of confidence and ability to play that sport and perform. Even though we've come a long way now, there's a lot more female-friendly change rooms. It's hard to believe 5-10 years ago, we didn't really have any female-friendly change rooms. Most girls, and myself included, grew up, getting changed in the car or getting changed at home before getting to a sports ground. And even to this day, having, played a lot of club sport, we don't know how to use facilities in terms of teams. Like, there's showers there, but we've never had that practice of having a shower at a club or using it. So a lot of those things that I guess a lot of the men's teams are accustomed to, are used to using change rooms, used to having showers, used to having the best grounds and facilities and largest pitch space to play on. We're still not afforded some of those things.
Women are here, women are playing all these sports that were once traditionally seen as masculine or male, but now they're here to stay. They want to play. They want to play. They love to play, and the facilities and the sporting clubs haven't caught up.
Yeah, they haven't. And sport wouldn't be there if it weren't for, women and girls being part of these club environments. And unfortunately, many people still see the role of women sometimes to be in the canteen or just be a team manager or help out, but not really actually participate in the sport itself and or be seen in leadership positions like, coaching or being on a committee or being a team official.
And where do we start to create that change? Like, is it at the school level? Is it at the home, parents? Is it at the university level? Or is it, on a government? Like, where's the best way or what's the best place to start?
Yeah, I think education plays such a huge role. Right now, a lot of people just don't know. They don't know the problem, or therefore they don't see these issues. So I think it's making people aware, hey, these are people's lived experience in these settings. These issues do exist, but then trying to educate people as to why they're important. So right now, I think people at all levels in sport, participants, so playing participants, coaches, administrators at a club level, but also at a organisational level and even at a government level, there's a lack of knowledge and lack of education in these spaces for people to not understand. And therefore, if they don't understand, they don't act. So they just see, it's not really a priority, it's not something we're going to invest in, and they may just sweep it under the carpet and, add it to the to-do list for next year and then the year after, and therefore nothing gets happened.
We learnt a lot last year working on the Fair Access campaign with the Office for Women in Sport and Recreation, which you were heavily involved in as well. And through that, we heard the lived experiences of women and girls playing community sport, including yourself. And we were shocked at some of the stuff we heard about getting changed under scoreboards and just like you said before, the attitudes still stuck in this old school mentality, just not willing to change. So we definitely had a steep learning curve there because, we're not big into sport, but we thought that things were better now.
It's almost a given, we just assume in society today that as a female, you'd have a place to get changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would almost think that a female would have a place to change over a male. I would never ever thought that
exactly.
that you wouldn't even have a change room. So it wasn't even aware. And like you said, education is so important. And for us, who's not even in sport, that we didn't know that was going on. So I can't imagine how many other people out there don't know the same thing.
And it's at a community level, but even at an elite level. So as we were talking about before about the, Women's World Cup, that was just, here last year. The reality is that World Cup, as big as an event as it was, the best players, some of the best players in the world were not playing in the best stadiums. For example, we had a few games in Melbourne and they were played at Amy Park, for example. And yes, it's a, dedicated, football-built facility, in terms of a rectangular stadium. But if we really wanted to attract a huge crowd and, have the largest show for, the women, we possibly could have had it at one of the best stadiums that we have in the country, and that's at the MCG. But because of political reasons, and that all comes from, societal attitudes and, investment, we're not there yet.
The Fair Access policy rolled out by the Victorian government is a 3-stage policy to help community sporting clubs implement more inclusive practices and create more inclusive environments for women and girls in sport. In your opinion, is it working? Are we seeing that change?
Yeah, I think it's obviously been rolled out recently. A lot of sports clubs don't sometimes know what to do or know what fair access means. So to have some form of guidance and I guess education around what that means is really helpful. I think we'll know whether it's like working or not, whether on depending on how many clubs take it up on board. We know that community sport especially is run by volunteers, and a lot of sometimes they just I guess don't have the time to commit. But I think now that the Victorian government especially has pretty much mandated that, look, if clubs want to have access to funding and, I guess more investment opportunities, they need to get on board with something like the fair access. So I think in time it perhaps can make some change, but I really think it's important for these programs to be evaluated as well in the long term.
The objectives of the video campaign that we worked on last year with the Office for Women in Sport and Recreation was to create awareness around these issues, but we also wanted to highlight the unconscious bias that we as adults seem to have purely because of past experiences or what we've learned over time. We did that by asking a question, which I remember you hated this question, and it was, what would you consider a masculine sport and what would you consider a feminine sport? And I think your answer was, there's no such thing, which is very, very true. For the question, what would you consider a masculine sport? The adults tended to sway towards, the footy, the soccer, the cricket. Whereas when we ask the same thing to small children, what would you consider a female sport or a feminine sport? They said cricket, soccer, footy. So they hadn't been affected by societal bias or societal norms.
Yeah.
So it was really refreshing to see those answers side by side and hear the perspectives of young people. And it comes back to that education where it has to start from an early age so that kids don't develop those that bias over time and that way of thinking as well.
Yeah.
You certainly wore your heart on your sleeve in that campaign. What's the response been like for you since it's been released?
For me, I think the response has been it's quite positive, but I think a lot of people from my experience reached out and just asked if I was okay because some of those experiences I share, it was a little bit difficult for me to share, but I think it kind of hit home as to the impact that some of these experiences can have on people participating in sport, whether it's playing or coaching or any form of leadership.
So you cover a lot of this lived experience in your research, right? So it's what you've done in your PhD.
Yes.
So with that, from your experience, because we obviously don't have anywhere near the amount of experience you do have in the space, and for everybody else listening in, how far off do you feel we are off from a space where things can be considered as equal?
Yeah, I think we've got a long way to go. It's great that participation for women and girls is increasing in many sports, especially male-dominated sports. But what we need to understand is it's fair enough to get to 50-50 playing participation, but if these players don't actually have avenues and pathways to progress into other things, like after they finish the sport, after they retire or if they get injured, we're not keeping these talented people in sport. They just leave. They leave the game. And right now we see that there are often pathways, for boys and men to, play, but then even after playing, there's opportunities for them to stay connected to that club and, through being on the committee or through being a coach or through refereeing or umpiring, officiating, they have pathways and opportunities that are visible that they can aspire to. But right now for women and girls, that's not the case.
What are the repercussions of that? What effect is this having on young women and what sort of message is it sending?
Yeah, so it has a huge impact, especially in terms of growing up and aspiring to be in a sport. If women aren't succeeding on a global stage, we often don't see our young generation aspiring to be that. But then also what happens when they do enter these sport environments, if we don't have pathways to keep them in these environments or opportunities to keep them in these environments, they leave. And that's a huge loss for sport as a whole. And it also contributes to other wider health issues such as, obesity, poor mental health. Sport provides so many benefits to society. So it's really going to cost us as a society if we keep losing women and girls to sport.
And is gender equality the only issue that we're currently experiencing in female sport or sport in general?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll start off by maybe like talk about how I got into the PhD, and that really goes into a lot of this. So, for me, through being a teacher, so working as a teacher in school, so as a business and economics teacher, part of my co-curricular was to do like coaching a sport. I hadn't coached before. I've played, but I hadn't coached. So, through the school then invested in me to go do some professional development in the form of coach education. And on these coach education courses, I noticed I was one of the only women on these courses, like in a room, filled with like around 50 odd men. And then I found that was quite, you definitely felt a bit isolated. It was an isolating experience. I also experienced that same isolation within these club settings. I felt that, again, I was one of the only women coaches, one of the only women committee members in a lot of these, at the cricket club, at the footy club, at the soccer club. So again, it was quite isolating. But what I've realised as well, I guess, as I've had more experience in these environments, gender played a part, but then it was also my race. So my colour played a part. And also now we're seeing, through like more research, that intersectionality plays a huge role. We're all made up of various intersections, and we have different experiences, and so we can't just treat women and girls like we're all the same. We're not like a homogenous group, as we say in research, where we all have our unique differences. And so that's why it's important to not just look at, gender equity, but ensure that we understand, various people's lived experiences within these sports settings to try and understand how we can be more inclusive. Once you get opportunity and access to participate in these spaces, it's all about having great positive experiences. It's important that, in terms of experiences on the field, such as homophobia, racism, are minimised. If they don't have positive experiences, they're not going to stay. So for me, I've experienced a lot of positive things in sport, but there have been a few instances where I haven't felt the love from sport. In hindsight, that's one of the reasons why I've, probably not as actively participating in sport now.
And what sort of incidents did you experience that made you feel like you potentially would leave the sport?
Yeah, so I guess I faced a lot of things with my gender, in the sense like being a woman coach. I was being one of the only people that were coaching, and you'd always, the referee wouldn't come shake my hand. They'd go to my male team manager to shake their hand, or just, people just not really genuinely thinking you'd win, or you'd create a positive environment, or not having that belief or backing you. You were more just, being given the opportunity to kind of hold space. So that's one thing. But yeah, I've also experienced racism while playing footy. I've experienced racism many times, but I guess I've never really said anything about it or called it out. But yeah, I guess now developed the agency to really say something when I do see injustice. And in that instance, I called out the player for what they had said, and I also reported it to the umpire immediately after the incident. But yeah, what followed was quite disappointing, in the sense that there wasn't really any immediate action taken in the moment of the incident, but then also following the incident, there wasn't swift action in addressing my complaint. The perpetrator that committed that act, they eventually said sorry 2 months after the incident, and that's because the process has really allowed for them to, take their time, not having to say anything immediately. But yeah, they had to invest in an investigation, and that's something I had to push for, because initially they wanted to mediate and conciliate, which I think's not effective methods in dealing with racism, as that allows for a narrative to be developed and, for time to play out. Only after an investigation was it that the player was found guilty and they had to apologise. But, by that time the season had completed, it was finished, and there was really no, consequence for those actions. I mean, it's not always about penalising the perpetrator, but I don't think they genuinely learnt their lesson for what they had, said, and, they don't really understand the impact that that's had on me. So.
And are you comfortable to share, like, what was said?
Yeah, so the person called me a black animal. Yeah, and again, it's not something, that you have to say on a field.
Or ever.
Ever.
Yeah.
Like, And again, through the whole mediation and conciliation process, I had to actually talk to the person that said these things. Some people think that it's a compliment, but it certainly didn't feel like a compliment to me at the time. And there was no reason for that person to say that to me. And I felt like it was a verbal, attack as to how I appeared. And it happened just after a tackle. So, that's an action in footy. So I shouldn't have to be, called.
Isolations, like pure isolation. And
Yeah.
What was it like going back out there onto the field after experiencing that?
Yeah, so it was really difficult for me. Like I said, I reported as soon as I heard it, and I had to think back as to why this person had said those things. I was the only person of colour on the field, and so that was what they had said. It was a verbal attack on how I looked, how I appeared, and the colour of my skin. For me, I was visibly I didn't want to show my upset, that I was upset, but I did go into the change rooms and have a cry. Luckily, it was just about half time, so that's when I went into the change rooms, and it wasn't something that I wanted to publicise or say that this happened, because it's quite a shameful thing. I was like, why did this happen to me? Does it happen to anybody else? And I didn't go back on the field as the same person. So it did impact me. There was a part of me that really died inside of me when that incident happened. I wasn't the same. Like I said, I didn't play with the same tenacity, same ferocity that I usually play with. I was just really reserved and impacted by what was said, and also the lack of action, taken by the officials, and also the coaching staff, and the committees. I feel like there could have been a lot more done in that moment. So for me, I think they could have stopped the game. The umpire perhaps could have rectified what was said, and then there could have been some form of action in terms of penalty during the game. For example, the player could have got sent off, but none of that happened, and so that player was allowed to play out the game, and then go home. And only after days and weeks was anything did any action occur, and that player actually got to play in the game the following week as well, because of the lengthy process. And I'm thinking, well, if you really felt sorry, and if your club felt sorry, there would have been some form of penalty in terms of you not playing, being able to play, or being eligible to play. But that never happened. So, but all they had to do at the end of this investigation was just say sorry. And in sociology, we say there's a concept called white tears, where often when a person of colour calls something out, the perpetrator starts crying, they plead mental health, and therefore the person that's calling it out becomes the perpetrator, then they become the victim.
Yeah, and we've seen racial slurs, the consequences of racial slurs play out at an elite level, players being reprimanded for things that they've said, or a member of the public being banned from the MCG, for instance. That really needs to be reflected at a community level as well.
Yeah, 100%. We still I think elite sport has they've got to improve in this space as well, as we see, instances of fans racially vilifying players. It happens quite, frequently, but also clubs need, obviously there's a lot of clubs now, there's racial incidents, racial practices that occur. So for example, in some of my research, some people speak about how just having extra vigilance or security around people of colour, or having a booze bus right outside their training stadium or something like that. There's systemic forms of racism that are visible. And in research, we say there's these things called microaggressions. So there are actions up on time that impact people. The more you experience these incidents, so you get called something, or you see, for example, a booze bus right outside because of your perhaps place there, because of your background or your culture, your race. These things, they have a dig at you, little cuts, one cut at a time. And over time, those cuts build up, and they leave a bigger wound or hole that's not repairable. So I think that's what we need to understand is, it's not okay to do it at all. Even just instances of once or twice that's not good enough. We really need to ensure that we minimise these impacts to people, whether they're playing at a community level, an elite level, so that they don't happen.
And the fact that you were made to feel like the perpetrator in the end as well, um, it sort of reminds me of a lot of the stories that we heard when we were working on the Fair Access campaign last year. A lot of these women were saying that they felt it was their responsibility to speak up, and if they didn't, the onus would fall back on them, and then change wouldn't happen. But it shouldn't be your responsibility to have to speak up. There should be consequences from the get go, and people need to be reprimanded to stop it in its tracks.
Yeah, 100%. And think of, like, for me, it came from, my position as a teacher, as an educator in society. If this happened in a school, you call it out. There's a process in place as to what happens. In most organisations, professional organisations, they have processes. There's penalties. But in sport, it's a free for all. Often, a lot of the things we see in sport are just accepted.
Swept, yeah.
Yeah, and swept under the carpet and normalised. But if some of these things that we see in sport actually happened in professional working environments, we would see people they would not get away with it. So I think, sport definitely needs to up its game.
What sort of things can the system do to help support women and progression in sport?
Yeah, so I think investment is really important. So we need to have, dedicated investment into like women and girls sport, investment in like facilities, investment in programs, investment in athletes, in coaches and leaders, because without everyone, we don't really have much of a, program or system in itself. So I think it's really important to, have that investment, but then also have education, because right now a lot of people are not aware of some of the things that are holding us back in financial resources, but also investment in education.
And at which level should we be focusing on mainly now to get the quickest change?
Community sport is huge. That's where majority of people will play. A lot of people would argue it's elite sport, but the reality is 4% of people will actually go on to progress as being elite athletes. So it's important that we have some investment in those pathways for elite athletes to have that opportunity to progress and represent, us on the global stage. But most of our participation is at a grassroots and community level. So we need to see investment in infrastructure, investment in programs and in facilities and in people in these spaces, to ensure that, what we're having at a community level is inclusive for all people in our community to be a part of.
And how can we actually get young women or girls to actually be more interested in wanting to play sport? Because investment is one thing, but how do we actually get them to take that step? Because it's a decision that they get to make. It's their choice.
Yeah, yep. So I think, right now, a lot of these attitudes for women, for example, and they drop out, they leave sport if they have a negative experience. So I think it's really important to ensure we invest in women and girls from a very young age, from, say, elementary school, making sure that there's pathways, opportunities for them to enter these spaces, because they all want to participate. Often people don't even see an issue until later on, as they choose to progress. So I think it's important that we invest in the programs, in their development at a very young age, and then continue that as they get older, and hopefully there's more opportunities for them to stay in the sport and succeed.
In terms of how allies can get around and support women and girls in sport, both people already working in community sport and outside of sport, how can people support?
Yeah, so I think it's important for people in society just to remember to be like kind at all times. But I think it's important for people to immerse themselves with people that are not like them and generally get to understand what like people's experiences are. Because allyship comes from a form of care. It means that we care enough to want to make sure that everyone is safe, feels welcome, and I think allies, can definitely do this by, again, immersing themselves in different spaces with different people, but also educating themselves on certain issues so then they can, be the best ally that they possibly can be, and also know how to take swift action. So, allyship is often not just standing there side by side, but it's also being able to step in when they feel that they can do something.
And how can we get more women into sort of positions of leadership?
Yeah, so I think it's really important for women and girls to see themselves in leadership positions. And the reality is, right now there aren't many women leaders in sport, that are holding that position of responsibility. So I think we definitely need to, improve in that space. Women, there are amazing women out there that do exist, and often we see a lot of programs and initiatives around fixing women or developing them to be better, but often we don't see the same initiatives directed towards the men. But I think we need to make these spaces more inclusive of women. So it's not just getting the numbers up for women, but also making sure that they feel valued, they feel supported in order to stay and progress in these positions. So I think for young women and girls, it's important, for us to see leaders and also know that it's like some form of pipeline opportunity that's visible, so then they can see themselves getting there.
And Aish, for all the young girls out there maybe feeling like I'm not getting a fair go, or I've been discriminated against because of my gender or my race, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I'd say, if you genuinely love sport, if you're passionate about it, stick with it. I think there's a lot of benefits that sport can offer in terms of social connections, positive mental health, and also great opportunities. I think it can provide you a lot of good things in life. So I'd say to the young women and girls, stick with sport because there's a lot of positives to it. But it's definitely at the moment it's a bit of a bumpy road, but hopefully that bumpy road will be smoothened out, in time.
And they can follow, hopefully, 'cause you're a clear role model for the younger generation, or anyone of any female that's wanting to progress in sport. So I really applaud you for everything that you've done, because you are an advocate for change. And if we didn't have people like you, then we wouldn't be able to discuss these topics that are sometimes swept under the rug, and these experiences that we have just get dismissed and wouldn't feel so isolated.
Yes.
So with that being said, what would you say to your younger self?
I'd say my younger self, keep fighting and stay competitive, because I think that's really what's gotten to me where I am now. Is because there's only so many cuts you can take, but I remain quite positive. So I'd say to my younger self, know that you can be whoever you want to be. It's a bit of a bumpy road, but I'll eventually get there. So I hope that a lot of the work that I do just continues to make change and inspires the next generation.
You certainly are inspiring everyone around you. You've achieved a lot and done some amazing things, but what does success look like in your eyes?
Yeah, success. I want to paint the picture differently. So, right now we see a lot of the same people, leading sport, represented in sport. I'd like to see that landscape changing. Australia is a melting pot of, different cultures. And that's often, we see it as a strength in society, but we need to see it as a strength in sport. So I'd love to see just, greater representation from people in various communities in sport, making decisions and enjoying success. So for me, that is what success looks like, is just, a different visible sporting landscape.
How would you like to be remembered?
How would I like to be remembered? I'd like to be remembered as someone that's, that genuinely cares about a lot of these issues and strives to make change. I hope that a lot of my research can, be used by, sport organisations and people and general public in order to, just know more about some of these issues and develop, some agency to be able to call it out and make change. So I'd like to be remembered as someone that just is really passionate about all of this and, strives to just make these environments better.
Yeah. Aish, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing more about your story. You're doing some amazing work in this field, and we are already seeing that change slowly but surely. But you're doing some amazing things, and we take our hat off to you. So yeah,
Thanks, Aish.
Thank you.
thank
Thank
you.
you so much for having me.
Thanks, Aish.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to In Depth and In Focus. Your support is greatly appreciated. So if you want to hear more from us and our guests, please hit subscribe.